My name is Maya, and I'm 29. I was so excited to be reconnecting with my family after nearly 5 years of keeping them at arm's length. My career in tech had finally stabilized, and I wanted nothing more than to share my newfound success with them. But just 3 days after our seemingly happy reunion, I checked my bank account to find it had been completely emptied. When I called my father, panicking, his response sent a shiver down my spine. He just casually said, "It was necessary." If you're watching this and you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from your own family, please share your experience in the comments and click that subscribe button. This story might just show you what's possible when you finally decide to fight for yourself. Growing up in our little town in Ohio was never a fairy tale. Our family was always just one step away from financial disaster. My father, Richard, now 56, had a history of money troubles that clung to him like a second skin. At every family holiday, he was the one handing out IOUs instead of presents, borrowing from relatives with grand promises of repayment that almost never came true. My mother, Helen, was the one who held us all together. She was a dedicated nurse during the day and picked up shifts as a waitress on weekends. She'd often come home exhausted with dark circles under her eyes, but she would still find the energy to sit with me and help me with my homework. She was the glue, always shielding my brother Leo and me from the true extent of our money problems. Then, when I was 19, our world shattered. My mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer, a cruel twist of fate for someone so full of life. 6 months later, she was gone, leaving behind a hole in our lives that felt bottomless. Her death was the main earthquake, but the aftershocks would ripple through our family for years. After the funeral, I learned that the small life insurance policy she had so diligently maintained had vanished. Dad claimed the money had gone toward her medical bills, but his explanation felt flimsy, incomplete. I was too overwhelmed with grief to press him on it. With Mom gone, I was effectively on my own. Dad retreated into himself, spending more and more time at the local bars. Leo, who was only 14 at the time, grew quiet and distant. I knew I had to carve out my own future, so I started applying for every scholarship I could find and juggling multiple jobs just to get by. Those years were a blur of exhaustion. I'd attend classes during the day, work at a call center in the evenings, and wait tables all weekend. There were times I subsisted on nothing but cheap instant noodles and black coffee. All the while, Richard would call me periodically, not to see how I was, but to ask for money. He'd say it was for bills or to help with Leo. Against my better judgment, I'd send whatever small amount I could scrape together, often by skipping my own meals. After I graduated, I got an entry-level job at a tech firm in Denver. I poured all my energy into my work, slowly earning a reputation for being creative and relentlessly dedicated. Every promotion felt like a victory, a step further away from the instability of my past. By the time I was 29, I had become a senior project manager with a comfortable salary, a sleek apartment in a great part of the city, and most importantly, the financial security I had always craved. My relationship with my family had grown strained over the years. Calls with my father became brief, awkward obligations on holidays. Leo and I would text now and then, but he seemed to have bought into our father's narrative that I had selfishly abandoned them for my career in Denver. When the email invitation for a family reunion landed in my inbox, my first impulse was to say no. It was from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She had always been kind to me, but she remained fiercely loyal to my father, fully aware of all his shortcomings. The reunion was set to be at the old family homestead where my grandparents had lived, which was now owned by my Uncle Ben. "I don't think I can go," I told my best friend Chloe over brunch one weekend. every single time I talk to my dad, I walk away feeling used and guilty. Chloe looked at me, her expression thoughtful. Maya, maybe this is a chance to reset things. You're not that struggling college kid anymore. You're strong and independent. Besides, she added, don't you want to see Leo? He must be in college by now. She had a point. Leo would be 23, and I'd missed so much of his young adult life. He was still my little brother, no matter how distant we'd become. I also missed my cousins, my aunts, and my uncles, the extended family that had been a constant presence in my childhood. Just be careful, Chloe warned, knowing my history all too well. Don't go sharing all the details about your finances. You know how your dad gets. I nodded, a specific memory surfacing. In college, I'd mentioned winning a small academic award that came with a cash prize. Within a day, my dad had called with a sob story about the power being shut off. I sent him the entire prize, only to find out from Leo later that the utilities were fine. Dad had just bought a beat-up old motorcycle that he sold for a loss a month later. Despite these painful memories, I decided to go. I booked the time off work, bought thoughtful gifts for everyone, and even splurged on a new dress. The long drive from Denver to rural Ohio gave me plenty of time to mentally prepare. I rehearsed my boundaries, reminding myself over and over that I was no longer that desperate to please teenager. As I crossed the state line, a mix of hope and anxiety churned in my stomach. A part of me longed for that warm, fuzzy feeling of family connection, but another, more cautious part of me stayed on high alert, ready to protect the secure life I had fought so hard to build. I had no idea that this reunion would push those boundaries to their breaking point. The old family farmhouse seemed to have shrunk since I'd last seen it. The white paint was peeling and the wraparound porch sagged slightly under the weight of memories. As I pulled into the gravel drive, I saw a few familiar cars parked alongside ones I didn't recognize. My heart began to pound as I got out of my car. Before I could even reach for my suitcase, the front door swung open and Aunt Carol rushed out. "Maya! Oh my goodness, just look at you!" she cried, pulling me into a tight hug that smelled of the same floral perfume she'd worn for as long as I could remember. So sophisticated and grown up. Your mother would be so incredibly proud. The mention of my mom sent a familiar ache through me, but I forced a smile. "It's so good to see you, Aunt Carol. Thanks for putting all of this together." "Oh, nonsense. Come on in, everyone can't wait to see you." The house was filled with the warm, chaotic buzz of family. I was immediately swallowed up by a wave of hugs and greetings from cousins and uncles. Then I saw my father. Richard was standing by the fireplace, looking older and more worn than I remembered, his clothes hanging loosely on his thin frame. In spite of all my mental preparation, my stomach clenched. "Hi, Dad," I said, moving in for a stiff, awkward hug. He patted my back. "Nice car," he said, glancing out the window. "Must be doing pretty well for yourself out there in the big city." Before I could figure out how to respond, Leo appeared at his side. My little brother wasn't little anymore. He was tall, nearly 6 feet, with our mother's kind eyes that stood in stark contrast to the hardened set of his jaw, which reminded me painfully of our father. "Hey, May," he said, using a childhood nickname I hadn't heard in years. "Leo," I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through me. "It's so good to see you. You look great. How's college?" A strange, fleeting look passed between my father and my brother. "It's fine," Leo said vaguely, "when I can afford the tuition." "Your brother is studying computer science," Richard jumped in, his voice full of pride. "He's sharp as a tack, gets it from my side of the family." I bit my tongue, stopping myself from pointing out who had actually spent hours helping Leo with his math homework. Instead, I asked, "Which university?" "State," Leo replied. "Same one you went to." "That's wonderful," I said, a little surprised. I wondered if he'd managed to get any scholarships like I had. We'll have to catch up properly later. The conversation was thankfully interrupted when Aunt Carol called everyone for dinner. We all moved out to the back patio, where long tables were set up under strings of fairy lights. I ended up sitting between my cousin Jessica and Uncle Ben's new wife, a woman named Denise. Jessica leaned in during the meal. "So, tell me everything about Denver. You're like, what, a marketing director or something?" "Senior project manager," I corrected, unable to hide a small note of pride. "I just got the promotion last month." "Wow, that's amazing," Jessica said. "You were always the ambitious one. I bet you're making the big bucks now, huh?" I noticed my father's head turned slightly in our direction. "It's comfortable," I said, choosing my words carefully, Chloe's warning echoing in my mind. "Oh, don't be so modest," Richard called out from across the table. "Come on, tell us what you're pulling in these days." An awkward hush fell over the table. "Dad, that's not really appropriate dinner conversation," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "What?" "We're family," he insisted. "Besides, I was just telling everyone how proud I am of my successful daughter." I quickly changed the subject, asking Leo about his classes, and felt a wave of relief as he started talking about a coding project he was working on. The chatter gradually resumed, but I could feel my father's eyes on me for the rest of the meal. After dinner, as people were clearing the tables, Richard cornered me in the kitchen. "So, I heard you got a nice bonus with that promotion," he said, casually rinsing a plate. I froze. "Where did you hear that?" He shrugged. "You mentioned it to your Aunt Carol on the phone last week." I had mentioned it briefly when she'd called to confirm I was coming. I never dreamed she would pass that information along to him. "Leo's tuition payment is coming up," he continued, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "We're just a little short. It's just a temporary cash flow thing." That familiar sinking feeling of resentment mixed with obligation began to rise in my chest. "How much are you short?" "About 4,000, he said. "I wouldn't ask, but, you know. Family helps family." "Let me think about it," I replied, non-committal. "I have some of my own big expenses coming up." He nodded, but his expression soured. Sure. "No rush. We've got the whole weekend to catch up." Later that evening, after most of the family had gone to bed, I found myself on the porch swing with Jessica. The air was warm, and the sound of crickets filled the night. "It's really good to have you back, Maya," she said quietly. "It's been way too long." "I know," I admitted. "Work's been crazy, but that's not really an excuse." She was quiet for a moment. "How are things really with your dad and Leo?" "Complicated," I said after a long pause. "We don't talk much." Jessica nodded. "Uncle Richard has been going through a rough patch. Aunt Carol has been helping them out a lot." "Oh?" I tried to sound casual. "What kind of rough patch?" She shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't be the one to say anything. Just, the usual money stuff. "I think he got into some gambling for a while." She hesitated. "Just be careful, okay?" "I love Uncle Richard, but..." "But what?" "Nothing," she said, backing off quickly. "Just... family stuff can be messy, you know?" I knew she was holding something back, but before I could ask more, Richard stepped out onto the porch. "Beautiful night," he said, as if he hadn't been listening from the doorway. "Jessica, your mom's looking for you." After Jessica disappeared inside, My father sat down next to me on the swing. "It's good to have you home, Maya. I've really missed you." For a fleeting moment, I let myself believe him. We sat in silence, watching the fireflies blink in the darkness. He put his arm around my shoulders, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like his daughter again. The rest of the weekend was a blur of family fun. We had a big barbecue, played a sloppy game of softball, and told stories around a bonfire. Leo gradually warmed up to me, even showing me his laptop and excitedly explaining his latest coding project. Richard was unusually attentive, asking about my work and my life in Denver with what seemed like genuine curiosity. By Sunday afternoon, as I was packing my car to drive back, I felt a fragile sense of optimism. Maybe this reunion was a turning point. Maybe we could finally start to heal. "Drive safe," Richard said, helping me with my luggage. "And think about what we talked about. Leo really needs this." I nodded and gave him a quick, tight hug. "I'll call you next week," I promised. As I pulled away, I looked in my rearview mirror. My father and brother were standing side by side, waving. I couldn't shake a deep-seated feeling that something was wrong, but I pushed it down, trying to focus on the good parts of the weekend. I had no idea that this brief moment of family harmony was about to be completely destroyed. 3 days after I got back to Denver, I was still feeling the warm afterglow of the reunion. It had gone so much better than I dared to hope. I was scrolling through photos on my phone, smiling at a picture of Leo laughing and another of my dad with his arm around Uncle Ben. I decided to celebrate my promotion by treating myself to some new clothes for work. There was a blazer at an upscale boutique near my apartment that I'd had my eye on for weeks. I tried it on, loved the way it fit, and brought it to the counter with a few other items. "That will be $478, the sales clerk said with a smile. I handed her my credit card, already picturing how I'd rearrange my closet. She swiped it, and then her smile faltered. "I'm sorry, it's been declined." "That's odd," I said, a hot flush of embarrassment creeping up my neck. "Could you try it again?" She did. Same result. "Do you have another form of payment?" I dug through my wallet for my debit card, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "Try this one, please." Again, declined. I mumbled an apology to the clerk, promised I'd be back, and rushed out of the store, my face burning with confusion. In my car, I immediately pulled out my phone and logged into my mobile banking app. When the page loaded, I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. My checking account balance, $23.18. Just last week, I'd had over $18,000 in checking and another $30,000 in savings. My hands started to shake as I scrolled through the recent transactions. And there they were, a series of transfers made over the past 3 days, draining almost every cent I had. The biggest was a single transfer of $20,000 to an account I didn't recognize, followed by a string of smaller withdrawals. My first thought was identity theft. My heart hammered against my ribs as I called my bank's fraud department. "Miss Evans, I see the transfers you're referring to," the bank representative said calmly after I'd frantically explained the situation. "However, these don't appear to be fraudulent. The transfers were initiated from your regular IP address using your correct login credentials, and the security questions were all answered correctly." "That's impossible." "The recipient account is in the name of a Richard Evans," she continued. "Is that individual known to you?" The blood drained from my face. Richard Evans, my father. "Miss Evans?" the representative repeated. "Yes," I whispered, a wave of nausea washing over me. "He's my father." "In that case, ma'am, this appears to be a family matter, not a case of fraud. If you wish to dispute the charges, you would need to file a police report." a police report against my own father. The thought made my stomach churn. I need to make some calls first, I managed to say. Thank you. I ended the call and just sat there in my car trying to breathe. My father had gotten into my accounts and taken everything. All the money I had worked so hard for, saved so meticulously, gone. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "Hello, stranger," he said, his voice cheerful. "Missing us already?" "Dad," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Did you take money from my bank accounts?" There was a short pause. "Oh, that," he said, his tone shifting to one of casual nonchalance. "Yeah, it was necessary. Leo's tuition was due." "You needed $48,000 for tuition?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Dad, that was all the money I had. How did you even get into my accounts?" "Come on, Maya, don't be so dramatic," he scoffed. "I saw you type in your password when you were checking your balance on your phone at the reunion. You really ought to be more careful with that stuff." I was speechless. He wasn't just admitting to it. He was blaming me. He was acting like this was no big deal. "Dad, what you did is a crime," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "It's theft. You need to send the money back. Now." He laughed, an actual dismissive laugh. "A crime? Between family? Don't be ridiculous. Look, Leo needed the money and you've got a good job. You'll make it back in no time." "What about my rent? My bills? Dad, you took everything." "You'll figure it out," he said, his tone cold. "You always do. You're the resourceful one, remember? Besides, we're family, and family helps each other out." That phrase again. His lifelong mantra. But it only ever went one way. "I put myself through college," I shot back, the anger finally boiling over. "I worked 3 jobs and lived on instant noodles." "Where was the family help then?" "That was different," he said dismissively. "I was going through a hard time after your mother died." "And what about Mom's life insurance?" I demanded, the question that had been buried in my mind for a decade finally bursting out. "What really happened to that money, Dad?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I thought so," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I want my money back. All of it. By the end of this week." His tone hardened. "Or what? You'll call the cops on your own father? On the man who raised you?" "If I have to," he scoffed. "Go ahead. It'll be your word against mine. I'll just tell them you gave it to us, which is what you should have done in the first place." "I'm serious, Dad." "So am I," he snapped. "You walked out on this family years ago to go play big shot in Denver. The least you can do is help your brother get his education. Or are you too selfish for even that?" The accusation hit its mark, just as he knew it would. He had always been a master at twisting the knife. "I didn't walk out on anyone," I said, my voice breaking. "I was 19 when Mom died. You were supposed to be the parent, not me." "And now I am being a parent," he retorted. "I'm making sure Leo gets what he needs." What kind of sister wouldn't want that for her brother? I closed my eyes, the raw manipulation of his words washing over me. "This conversation is over. Return my money, or I'm taking legal action. I mean it." "You wouldn't dare," he said, but I could hear a tiny crack in his confidence. "Watch me," I replied, and I hung up the phone. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, tears streaming down my face. The betrayal was a physical pain, deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the theft. It was the casual cruelty, the complete disregard for my life, my work, my feelings. My phone buzzed, a text from Leo. "How could you threaten Dad? after everything he's done for us. I thought you cared about my education." So, my father had already started spinning his version of the story. Of course he had. I drove home in a haze, my mind a whirlwind of questions. How was I going to pay my rent? Could I actually press charges against my own father? What would that do to what was left of my relationship with Leo and the rest of the family? When I got to my apartment, Chloe was waiting by my door, holding a bottle of wine and a bag of takeout. I had sent her a single, frantic text. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug the moment she saw my face. "Come on, let's get you inside and figure this out." As we sat at my kitchen table, I told her everything: the reunion, the false hope, the devastating betrayal. "I cannot believe he did this," Chloe said, her face red with fury on my behalf. "Actually, scratch that. I can totally believe it. This is classic Richard." "What do I do?" I asked, staring blankly into my wine glass. "If I report him, my family will hate me forever." Chloe reached across the table and took my hand. "The real question, Maya, is will you ever forgive yourself if you don't?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. I knew she was right. This was about so much more than the money. It was about finally breaking a lifelong cycle of manipulation and emotional abuse. "I know a good lawyer," Chloe said gently. "Her name is Eva Rostova. She specializes in this kind of thing." "Fathers stealing from their daughters?" I asked with a bitter laugh. "Financial abuse," Chloe corrected. "It's more common than you'd think, especially within families." "And Maya? What your father did isn't just wrong. It's a crime." I nodded slowly, a new sense of resolve hardening inside me. "Okay, make the appointment." That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed incessantly with texts and calls from relatives. Aunt Carol pleading with me to be reasonable. Uncle Ben suggesting a family meeting to work things out. Cousins expressing their confusion and dismay. I ignored them all. For the first time in my life, I was not going to let my father's web of manipulation control my actions. I was going to stand up for myself, no matter what it cost me. The last text of the night was from my father. "You'll regret this. Family is supposed to stick together." With steady fingers, I typed out a reply. "See you in court." The law office of Eva Rostova was in a sleek downtown skyscraper with a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains. Eva herself was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense air that immediately set me at ease. "Tell me everything," she said after we sat down. "Don't leave out a single detail." For the next hour, I did just that. I recounted the entire story, from my mother's death to the reunion to the theft. Eva took meticulous notes, only interrupting with a few clarifying questions. "Do you have the bank statements?" she asked. I slid a folder across her desk. Everything, the transfers, the screenshots, everything the bank sent me. "And you're absolutely certain you never gave your father permission to access these funds?" "Absolutely not." Eva leaned back, studying me. "Maya, what your father did is identity theft and felony fraud. These are serious crimes. They carry serious penalties, including potential jail time." My stomach lurched. "Jail time?" "Potentially, yes. Is that an outcome you're prepared for?" I hesitated. In spite of everything, the thought of my father behind bars was hard to swallow. "What are my options?" "We can pursue this as a criminal matter by filing a police report, which will likely lead to charges. Or we can approach it as a civil case, suing for the return of your money plus damages." "What would you recommend?" Eva thought for a moment. "Given the family dynamics, I suggest we start with a police report and a formal civil demand letter." The threat of criminal prosecution might be enough to compel him to return the money without a full trial. And if it's not, then we proceed on both fronts. But Maya, you need to be prepared. This is going to blow up your family. Are you ready for that? I thought about my father's casual cruelty on the phone, the years of guilt trips, the stolen $48,000. I think the family was already blown up, I said quietly. I'm just the one who's finally acknowledging the damage. Ava gave a firm nod. All right then. Let's start with that police report. The next few hours were a whirlwind of paperwork. The officer who took my statement was professional, but visibly uncomfortable with the domestic nature of the crime. I could see the unspoken questions in his eyes. We'll file a motion to freeze any accounts where he might have stashed the money, Ava explained as we left the station. We'll also petition the court for an expedited hearing. As I walked out of her office, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. The first step was taken, but the road ahead looked terrifying. My phone had been buzzing all day. When I finally checked it, I had more than 20 missed calls and dozens of texts. Most were from family, their tones ranging from concerned to outright hostile. Aunt Carol, Maya, please call me. We need to talk this through. Your father is a wreck. Leo, I can't believe you're doing this to our own family. Dad was just trying to help me. Uncle Ben, let's all just sit down and sort this out like adults. And then a voicemail from my cousin Jessica. Maya, it's Jessica. Listen, I need to talk to you privately. There's something you need to know about Uncle Richard. Call me. I called Jessica back immediately. Maya? Thank God, she answered on the first ring. Did you really file charges against Uncle Richard? I filed a police report, yes, I confirmed. Why? She let out a long, heavy sigh. Because you're not the first person he's done this to. Last year, he somehow got into my dad's investment account and took $12,000. Dad didn't press charges because, well, you know, family, but it caused a massive fight. Why didn't anyone tell me this before the reunion? I asked, a fresh wave of anger rising in me. Aunt Carol talked everyone into keeping it quiet. She said Uncle Richard was getting help for his gambling problem and was trying to make things right. I guess that wasn't true. A gambling problem, I repeated, her vague warning on the porch suddenly making sense. How long has that been going on? Years, from what I can piece together, since before your mom passed away. She paused. Maya, there's something else about your mom's life insurance. My heart stopped. What about it? I overheard my parents talking about it once. They said Uncle Richard used that money to pay off a huge gambling debt. That's why there was nothing left for you and Leo. The world tilted on its axis. All those years, I had suspected something was wrong, but to hear it confirmed made me feel physically sick. Thank you for telling me, I managed to say. I needed to know that. What are you going to do now? Jessica asked. I'm going to get my money back, I replied, my voice filled with a new, cold resolve. And I'm going to make sure he can never do this to anyone else again. The week that followed was one of the hardest of my life. My father ignored the demand letter and instead marshaled the family to pressure me into dropping the case. Aunt Carol's calls became more desperate. Maya, please, he's not well. He needs help, not punishment. Leo sent a text that cut me to the core. Congrats on destroying what's left of our family. Hope your precious money is worth it. I struggled to focus at work, grateful that my boss was understanding and gave me some flexibility. Chloe was my rock, bringing over food when I was too drained to cook and just listening as I voiced my doubts and fears. "Have you thought about a support group?" she suggested one night. "There are organizations for victims of financial abuse." The term still felt alien. Financial abuse, but that's exactly what this was. "I'll look into it," I promised. The police investigation moved surprisingly fast. The evidence was irrefutable, and my father had done little to hide his tracks. 10 days later, the detective on my case called. "Miss Evans, we have more than enough to proceed with charges. The DA's office will be in touch." That same afternoon, Eva called. The court had granted our request for an expedited hearing. "We're in front of the judge next Tuesday," she said. "Be prepared." He's going to fight this. And fight it he did. He hired a high-powered attorney who specialized in white-collar crime, a man in a $1,000 suit who immediately filed a motion to dismiss. "Your Honor, this is a simple family misunderstanding," his attorney argued at the initial hearing. "Miss Evans verbally agreed to help with her brother's education and is now using the legal system to vindictively punish her father." Ava was formidable. "Your Honor, there was no agreement. This was a calculated act of theft. The evidence clearly shows Mr. Evans stole his daughter's password and systematically drained her accounts without her consent." The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, reviewed the evidence. "I find sufficient cause to proceed with both the criminal charges and the civil case. Mr. Evans, I am issuing a temporary order freezing all your financial assets pending the outcome of this matter. We will reconvene for trial in 2 weeks." As we left the courtroom, I saw my father and brother standing near the elevators. Richard's face was a mask of pure rage, but it was Leo's expression that caught my attention. For the first time, I saw confusion in his eyes, maybe even a flicker of doubt. Our eyes met for a split second before the elevator doors slid shut between us, and in that moment, I felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope that my brother was finally starting to see the truth. The morning of the trial felt surreal. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying every possible disastrous outcome. What if the judge didn't believe me? What if my father managed to twist everything around, like he always did? Chloe came with me, squeezing my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just tell your truth." The courtroom was small and intimidating, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and sick. Eva met us in the hall, her briefcase stuffed with files. "Ready?" she asked, her expression serious. I nodded, though I felt anything but ready. My father and his lawyer were already at their table. Richard stared straight ahead, refusing to look at me. Leo sat in the row directly behind him, his face a blank mask. To my surprise, the benches behind our table started to fill up. Aunt Carol and Uncle Ben were there, along with several cousins. Even my maternal grandmother, who rarely left her retirement home, was there. Their presence was both a comfort and a source of intense anxiety. Were they here for me or for him? The court was called to order, and Judge Elaine Monroe took her seat. "Evans versus Evans," she announced. "This is a civil case for the recovery of funds and a criminal case for identity theft and fraud. How do the parties plead?" My father's lawyer stood up. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The trial began. Ava went first, laying out the facts in a clear, unemotional timeline. She described how my father had spied on my password and then, over 3 days, methodically emptied my life savings. "This is not a family misunderstanding," she concluded. "This is a calculated crime by a man with a documented history of financial exploitation." My father's attorney then painted his own picture. Your Honor, this is a tragic story about an ungrateful daughter turning her back on her family. Richard Evans is a devoted father who has struggled since the death of his wife. When his son needed help with college, his daughter initially agreed, then spitefully changed her mind. This is a family dispute that has no place in a court of law. I gripped my hands together under the table, my knuckles white with rage at his lies. Eva gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. "They have no proof of an agreement," she whispered. "Don't let him get to you." I was the first to testify. The walk to the witness stand felt like wading through mud. After being sworn in, I took a deep breath. Eva gently guided me through my testimony. I described my shock at finding my accounts empty, the phone call with my father, and his casual, dismissive attitude. "Did you at any point give your father permission to access your accounts or transfer these funds?" Eva asked. "No, I did not," I said, my voice firm. "That money represented a decade of hard work. I would never have authorized that." "And did you ever agree to pay the full amount for your brother's tuition?" "No. My father asked for a loan of $4,000, which I told him I would consider. I never agreed to any amount, let alone $48,000. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. He approached me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Evans, you claim to care about your family, yet you moved 1,000 miles away and rarely visit, correct?" "I moved to Denver for my career," I said evenly. "I've invited my father and brother to visit many times. And isn't it true you've achieved significant financial success while your father and brother have struggled?" "I have worked very hard for everything I have," I said, my voice tight. "I put myself through college with scholarships and 3 jobs. No one helped me." "So you admit you were unwilling to help your family, despite having the means to do so?" "Objection, Your Honor," Eva said, standing. "Counsel is mischaracterizing the witness's testimony." "Sustained," the judge replied. The attorney changed his approach. "Did you ever explicitly tell your father he was not to use your password if he happened to see it?" "I never imagined I would have to tell my own father not to steal from me," I shot back, the bitterness finally seeping into my voice. When I finally stepped down, I was emotionally exhausted, but felt like I had held my own. My father testified next, and he was a master performer. He spun a story of a loving father and a promise made in confidence. "She gave me the password," he claimed, looking earnestly at the judge. "She knew I was going to transfer the money for Leo's schooling. We discussed it. She only changed her mind later and decided to punish me." I watched him, recognizing the sincere mask he always wore when he was lying. Eva's cross-examination was a masterclass. "Mr. Evans, can you produce any evidence of this supposed agreement? A text, an email, a witness?" "It was a private family conversation," he said evasively. "So that's a no," Eva stated. "Let's talk about your gambling debts, Mr. Evans. Is it not true that you have a history of taking money from family members to cover your losses?" "Objection," his attorney yelled. "Irrelevant and prejudicial." "Your Honor," Eva countered, "the defendant's gambling addiction provides a clear motive and shows a pattern of behavior." "I'll allow it," the judge ruled. "The witness will answer." My father squirmed. "I may have had some issues in the past, but I'm in recovery. Is it true, Mr. Evans, that you used your late wife's life insurance policy, money that should have gone to your children, to pay off gambling debts?" A gasp went through the courtroom. My grandmother put a hand to her chest. "That's a lie," my father snapped, his composure finally cracking. "Who told you that?" "Mr. Evans," Eva continued, ignoring his question, Our investigation has found that you also accessed and emptied a joint investment account belonging to your brother-in-law, Ben, correct? Uncle Ben leaned forward, his face grim. My father glanced at his lawyer, panicked. That was a loan. Ben agreed to it. A loan that was never repaid, Eva said coolly. Just like the thousands you've borrowed from other relatives over the years. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mr. Evans, have you taken money from other family members without their permission? They were loans, he insisted, his voice rising. Family helps family. That's what we do. The real shock came when Leo was called to the stand. I braced myself, expecting him to back up our father's story. But as he walked to the stand, I saw a profound hesitation in his eyes. Leo, my father's attorney began, can you tell the court about your tuition situation? Leo glanced nervously at our father. I'm studying computer science at State University. Dad helps with tuition when he can. And was your tuition due at the time of these transfers? Leo shifted in his seat. Not exactly. I'm actually on a full academic scholarship. I don't have any tuition expenses. A stunned silence filled the room. Even my father's high-priced lawyer looked shocked. Then what was the $48,000 for? The judge asked, her voice sharp. Leo looked down at his hands. I don't know. Dad told me it was for my education, but I never saw any of it. My father's face turned a deep, blotchy red. Leo, he hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The judge banged her gavel. Mr. Evans, you will be silent or you will be removed. Eva approached Leo gently. Leo, has your father ever taken out funds in your name without your knowledge? He hesitated for a long moment, then gave a small, defeated nod. Last year, he took out a student loan in my name. He said it was for my living expenses, but I never saw that money either. Objection, the defense attorney shouted. Your Honor, this goes to pattern and credibility, Eva argued. I'll allow it, the judge said, her gaze fixed on my father. The final witness was Jessica. She was visibly nervous but spoke with determination. Miss Lopez, Eva began, can you tell the court about any financial dealings you've witnessed involving the defendant? Jessica took a deep breath. 2 years ago, I saw Uncle Richard trying to borrow money from my dad. When my dad refused, Uncle Richard got really angry. Later that night, I saw him on my dad's computer. The next day, my dad discovered $12,000 was missing from his investment account. Did your father report this? No, Jessica said sadly. Aunt Carol begged him not to. She said it would tear the family apart. And do you have any knowledge of your Aunt Helen's life insurance policy? Jessica nodded. My parents talked about it once. They said Uncle Richard used it all to pay off gambling debts right after she died. My father shot up from his chair. This is all lies. They're all turning on me. The judge banged her gavel. Mr. Evans, sit down now or you will be held in contempt. He remained standing, his face twisted with rage. I was trying to hold this family together. I was all they had. Bailiff, the judge ordered, please restrain the defendant. As the bailiff approached, my father pointed a trembling finger at me. You ungrateful child! I gave you everything. You gave me nothing, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the sudden silence. You only ever took. The bailiff escorted my father out of the courtroom as he continued to shout. The judge called for a 15-minute recess. In the hallway, I was suddenly surrounded, but they weren't angry. Aunt Carol hugged me, sobbing. I'm so sorry, Maya, she whispered. I wanted so badly to believe he was getting better. I should have warned you. Uncle Ben patted my shoulder. We all should have said something sooner. My grandmother took my hands in hers, her eyes fierce. Your mother would be so proud of you for standing up for yourself. It's all she ever wanted for you. When court resumed, the judge delivered her ruling swiftly. Based on the overwhelming evidence, I find in favor of the plaintiff. Harold Reynolds is ordered to repay the full amount of $48,000 plus $10,000 in damages and all legal fees. She then turned to the criminal matter. There is clear and convincing evidence of identity theft, fraud, and a pattern of financial exploitation. I am recommending the district attorney prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. She looked directly at me. Miss Evans, the court commends your courage. Financial abuse within families is a hidden epidemic. By speaking your truth, you have not only sought justice for yourself, but have likely protected others. Outside the courthouse, I felt a strange combination of victory and profound sadness. I had won, but the cost felt immense. My relationship with my father was shattered beyond repair, though maybe it had been all along. As I stood on the steps with Chloe and Eva, Leo approached me. "Maya," he said, his voice small, "can we talk?" We stepped aside. "I didn't know," he said, his eyes on the pavement, "about any of it. Mom's insurance, the other money. Dad always told me you abandoned us, that you were selfish." And I believed him. "I know," I said gently. "He can be very convincing." Leo looked up, his eyes full of tears. "What happens now?" I didn't have an answer. The road ahead was going to be messy and painful, but for the first time, it would be a road built on truth, not on lies. "Now," I said, taking his hand, "we start over." The weeks after the trial were a whirlwind of emotions. The court's verdict was a validation, but the family fallout was immense. My relatives split into two distinct camps. Aunt Carol, Uncle Ben, and most importantly, Leo, rallied around me. But my father's brothers and their families cut me off completely, unable to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the one exposed in court. Facing jail time, my father accepted a plea deal, probation, mandatory counseling for his gambling addiction, and community service. The court also set up a restitution order, garnishing any income he made until I was paid back in full. Aunt Carol sent me a letter, regretfully uninviting me from the family Thanksgiving. "I believe you did the right thing, Maya," she wrote, "but some people aren't ready. I hope you understand." I did, but it still hurt. The holidays, already a painful reminder of my mother's absence, felt lonelier than ever. Then, the anonymous calls started, late at night from blocked numbers. Sometimes just silence, sometimes a whispered insult. I reported them, but the police said there was little they could do. "Change your number," Chloe urged. "Maybe stay with me for a bit." I thought about it but refused. "I can't keep running," I told her. "This is my life. I won't let him scare me away from it." I installed a security system, and the calls eventually stopped, but the anxiety lingered. The most significant change came in an email from Leo about a month later. "Maya," he wrote, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. Dad's version of the story was the only one I ever heard. I see now how he manipulated both of us. I'm so sorry for the things I said and the way I treated you. Could I maybe come visit sometime?" I read the email through a blur of tears and immediately replied, inviting him to come whenever he was ready. When he arrived 2 weeks later, the air was thick with unspoken words. We finally broke the tension over pizza on my living room floor. "I looked up to him my whole life," Leo admitted, his voice cracking. "Even when he'd disappear for days, or the power got shut off. He was all I had left, so I made excuses for him. "I know," I said softly. "I did too, for a very long time." "He told me you abandoned us," Leo confessed, "that you took your share of Mom's insurance money and just left." "There was no insurance money for us, Leo," I said, the old lie still stinging. "He used it to pay off gambling debts." "I know that now," he said, looking down. "I found the old paperwork in the attic. The policy, the withdrawal slips. He lied about everything." We talked for hours that night, piecing together two different versions of the same past, finally building a bridge across years of manipulation. By the time he left, our relationship had fundamentally changed. We were no longer just siblings. We were survivors. Getting the money back was a slow, frustrating process. My father did everything he could to avoid paying. Eva was relentless, filing motions and tracking down hidden assets. In the meantime, I had to rebuild my finances from scratch. Chloe loaned me rent money, and I cut back on everything. The support I received was humbling. My colleagues started a Maya's emergency fund. My elderly neighbor brought me homemade dinners. I started attending a support group for victims of financial abuse. Hearing other stories, mostly from women exploited by people they trusted, was both heartbreaking and empowering. "You're one of the lucky ones," the facilitator told me. "You fought back." Many never get the chance. 3 months after the trial, Aunt Carol invited me for coffee. She looked like she had aged a decade. "I knew more than I let on," she admitted, her voice trembling, "about his gambling, about how he treated you after your mother died. I should have done something." "Why didn't you be?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Family loyalty, I guess," she sighed. "And denial. It's easier to pretend everything's fine than to face the ugly truth." She then told me something that healed a part of me I didn't know was still broken. "Your mother knew about the gambling. She tried to protect you, putting money aside. When she got sick, she made me promise to look out for you. I failed her, and I failed you. I am so sorry, Maya." Knowing my mother had seen the truth, that she had tried to protect us, was a gift. As the months passed, my life slowly began to normalize. My savings account started to grow again. I adopted a rescue cat, and my smaller, cozier apartment began to feel like home. The holiday season approached, and I decided to host a Friendsgiving, a celebration of the family I had chosen. My phone pinged with a text from my father. "Happy Thanksgiving. Family should be together." I read it, put my phone down, and looked around the table at the laughing faces of my friends. He was right, and my family was right here. A year after the trial, I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the collar of a new blazer. I had been promoted again, this time to director of project management. The woman in the reflection looked different, stronger, clearer-eyed. The doorbell rang. It was Leo, now in his final year of college, with his new girlfriend, a sweet engineering student named Andrea. Our visits had become a regular, comforting routine. As Leo told me about a new project, I felt a wave of gratitude for this relationship we had salvaged from the wreckage. The healing wasn't a straight line. There were still bad days, days when the anger and betrayal felt fresh. My therapist, Dr. Patrice, reminded me that was normal. "The goal isn't to erase the pain," she'd say, "but to learn to carry it differently." I had taken that to heart. Harold made minimal court-ordered payments. He sent birthday cards and occasional texts that felt more performative than genuine. "He still won't admit he did anything wrong," Leo told me during one visit. "He talks about it like it was all a big misunderstanding." I had accepted that I might never get a real apology, and strangely, that was liberating. My healing didn't depend on him. My experience had also opened a new door. I started volunteering, teaching financial literacy to young adults aging out of the foster care system. True love doesn't demand your financial ruin, I would tell them. Family, I had learned, is defined by actions, not by blood. It's about respect, support, and difficult truths. It's about the people who celebrate your successes, not resent them. At Timothy's graduation, I gave him a check. "It's your share of Mom's inheritance," I told him, using the money we'd recovered so far. "She would have wanted you to have this to start your future." His eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me." "You're my brother," I said. "That was never going to change." As the 1-year anniversary of the trial approached, I threw a small party at my apartment for my chosen family. "What are we celebrating?" Chloe asked. "Survival," I replied. "Resilience, the fact that someone tried to break me, and I'm still standing here." Later that night, sitting on my balcony, I reflected on everything I had learned. That vulnerability is a form of courage, that boundaries are a form of self-love, and that I was stronger than I ever knew. My phone buzzed with a text from Leo. "Just wanted to say I love you, sis. Thanks for showing me what real strength looks like." I smiled, typing back, "Love you too. We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long, long time, I knew deep in my bones that it was true. The self-respect I had fought for was priceless, a foundation on which I could finally build a life of peace. Have you ever had to stand up to your family to protect your own well-being? I would love to read your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest boundaries are the ones we set with the people we're supposed to trust the most. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the face of adversity. Remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to protect your peace.